Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Innovation Tales. How do you know how work gets done in your organization? What methods do you use to keep your fingers on the proverbial pulse? In my experience, a typical approach is based on one-part reports, tracking performance against a predefined set of indicators, one-part business analysis conducted from time to time for a project or other, and three parts gut feel. Today, we'll explore how some leaders choose to go further with what could be described as X-ray vision for business.
Welcome to Innovation Tales, your go-to podcast for the human side of digital transformation.
I sat down with Brian Kelleher, Senior Director of Product at Pegasystems, and asked him how real-life organizations leverage process and task mining. He shares vivid examples that speak to the diversity of use cases and articulates a compelling vision where a virtuous continuous improvement cycle is made possible by the mined data. Brian is a visionary executive leader with over 2 decades in technology strategy and development. Specializing in product management, engineering, and service delivery, he is widely recognized for his ability to lead high-performing teams and for his role in the successful acquisition and integration of Everflow. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Brian Kelleher. Brian, welcome.
Hey, Alex. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me on your show. This is great.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I was really looking forward to sitting down with you because I think this conversation is going to tie in well with another theme that I've had in the previous episodes. Another guest a few weeks ago who was talking about experience design was underscoring how important it is for them to have real data available, which might be difficult in the first initial stages of a digital transformation. And I'm guessing, of course, that designers are but one group of stakeholders that can benefit from data mined from processes and tasks. So from your perspective, what are the roles and organizational functions that typically ask to have that capability?
Oh, that's a great question, Alex. Thanks for asking it. I think there's a lot of different roles that can benefit from process and task mining. Some of the key ones that we see come into play are IT. So technology partners are trying to figure out where they can make technology improvements. Business and operations, those are usually critical stakeholders because they're the ones that are talking to the customers every day and are feeling some of the pain points. Then I also think there's some other ones with some of the people that are actually doing the work themselves. So how could process and task mining be used to help improve their daily lives and give them a voice about some of the struggles that they're going through on a regular basis?
And I think this is a really good perspective for us to set the context with our audience. From the perspective of an employee working in operations before the widespread adoption of process and task mining, what might be going on in their day-to-day work, which later might be, considered, identified as being opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, so people don't really understand how hard it is for employees to get their work done every day. We actually did a study back in 2018, and we found that the average person uses 35 different applications every day to get their work done. Yeah,
That's
35.
crazy.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? But guess what? They switch between those applications 1,100 times every day. Can you imagine how hard that is to get work done? And the reason they're having to switch between those different applications is because they're having to become integration points between technologies that may be disparate. They're having to do a lot of duplicative work, like keying in data into multiple different screens. Maybe they're having to swivel between those 35 different applications just to get the information they need to get the work done every day.
So mostly this is toggling between applications. Swivel is the expression that I guess you use. Mm-hmm. Is there any other types of activities that surface when process and task mining capability is deployed?
Yeah, so process and task mining, if you're not familiar with it, it's using data to tell the truth about how work is really getting done. And so that's one of the biggest things that we see. It's really eye-opening for the operations. It's eye-opening for everybody because when they draw a process map of what they think the process looks like, it's usually a pretty clean, hey, they go here and then they go here and then they swivel back and forth maybe through some decisions. But when we actually load the data in, it's much more complicated and much messier than what they originally envisioned. And that's really where the opportunity lies, is how can you get as close to that pristine map that was originally put out there.
Echoes of Innovation.
So, Brian, in this segment, we use storytelling to bring our audience authentic insights. However, I always have to warn my guests to use discretion with names and specifics, to honor confidentiality agreements, and of course, respect the privacy of the people involved. With that in mind, can you think of a story that you can share with us which would illustrate how task and process mining leads to an improved experience for customers and employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one of my favorite stories. I tell this all the time, and we were working with a major healthcare provider here in the U.S., and they had a very expensive process that involved nurses. So every time this process ran, it cost about $6,000 for the process. Now, they used process mining to take a look at the process, and they found that the nurses were following exactly the steps that they had laid out for the process, but they still couldn't figure out where the inefficiencies were. So they did some over-the-shoulder conversations with the nurses, still didn't find anything. They deployed task mining out to those nurses' desktops, and they found out that 30% of the time that they were working in that process, they were using Microsoft Word. And they came back to me and said, no, this can't be true. We talked to them. Microsoft Word's not part of the process. There's no way. I asked them to humor me. Hey, can you go talk to the nurses and just ask them, hey, are you using Microsoft Word? Sure enough, the nurses were like, yep, we're using it. And they were like, why are you using it? Well, or why didn't you tell us you weren't using it? And the nurses said back to them, well, we weren't supposed to be using it, so we didn't want to tell you. And this is back to the truth about the data and understanding what's really going on. And so what they found out by using process and task mining together was their process had 5 different steps into it. And so at each step, if the nurses hit save and the system went down or didn't save correctly, they lost all of their work. So they're basically duplicating the entire process in Microsoft Word, so that if at any point in that process, the process failed, then they could go back and recreate the case that they were working on. So I think that was one of the best examples I've seen of process and task mining coming together to tell the whole story.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does sound quite, well, first of all, the benefits, of course, are clear. I think also the fact that users cannot fully trust the applications that they use, and therefore resort to, well, Word in this case, but very often I guess it's Post-its or something else like that. That certainly resonates with my experience. I wonder what, if you can share, of course, got this organization to start looking into this. So what was the trigger that served for them as a trigger to start looking into the data analytically rather than through some other way?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it came from they were using some of the old traditional methods that people use to understand how work is getting done. They were doing interviews. They were probably listening to whoever was complaining the most, and they weren't seeing the return on the investment that they were making that they thought, because they were making decisions based on what we consider like a bias, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, as we've all heard before, right? And so they said, well, let's take a look at the data, see what the data tells us, and then make a decision where we go from there. And I think that was really the point for them, where they wanted to find operational efficiencies. They knew they were out there, but they just weren't getting the results they wanted on the typical analysis methods they were using before.
How about the other challenges that organizations face in the initial stages? I suppose there must be some issues with privacy and concern about privacy.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Pretty much every client we work with, the very first question is, so what are my employees going to think about this? Is this Big Brother? Are we going to be collecting all their personal bank details off their computer? And one of the things that we really try to emphasize is you need to be upfront and open with your employees about, one, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to use task mining to collect data? And what are the end results? And like, what's the goal that we're going after as an organization? I think the organizations I've worked with that have used this almost as a hammer or like a correction tool don't really have the same results as the ones that have been open and upfront about how they're doing it. And then they actually show results. So we worked with another healthcare payer here in the US, and they had a couple different groups that they were deploying the task mining to. And one of the groups was a big time detractor. They were just like, we don't want this. This is spying. We don't want this out there. And the organization said, hey, why don't you give us a couple months. Let's put the software on there. Once you see what the results are, we'll share with you what the data looks like. I think that's another important piece, being transparent with the data that you're collecting. And this group actually ended up becoming the biggest advocates for task mining. And they said, wow, well, this really helped improve us because we were able to make some changes that removed the roadblocks that were keeping us from getting our work done every day.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool. Does that story, well, both stories you've shared, are they, is there a lot of variability in how organizations go about it? Does deploying this type of technology end up being a bit of an adventure, or is it a rather predictable implementation that yields results consistently?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of it has to do with the outcomes that the organization is going after. So one of the things that we typically see, obviously, process and task mining can be used to help reduce costs and make the organization more efficient, but it can also be used to help create more value in the organization. So we worked with a bank down in Brazil that was a mortgage loan operator, and they actually were able to look at their loan approval process using just process mining. They hadn't even gotten to task mining yet. And they were actually able to streamline that process in a way that gave them a competitive advantage against other people in their industry, so their same peer group. And so that was a little bit of a different adventure than, hey, I'm going to go look at nurses' processes and figure out why is the process running so long. So you really have to tie the process and task mining initiative to some sort of business outcome and what's the goals of the organization, and how can you use it more as a strategic tool as opposed to I'm just going to go look for technology to pull out.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like in one case it would have been driven from an operational excellence perspective, whereas the other example you gave, more strategic. There's definitely like we want to be able to, have our customer experience have faster turnaround times, so something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think there's a lot of different use cases that we've seen out there around, whether it's customer journey analysis, if it's, like you said, more strategic and creating more value by streamlining the customer operations, or again, how can I make my organization run more efficiently?
And to finish, maybe what about all of the use cases around, how do I call this? Maybe transparency, or not control in the sense of control of individual employees, but maybe compliance in that respect. Is, in your experience, are organizations benefiting from this kind of technology when they are in a highly regulated environment?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest use cases for process mining is process conformance, and that's really comes into play with what you said. So if you have a process where if a specific step or multiple steps are missed because somebody skipped it or whatever, they could be subjected to regulatory fines, or maybe they're missing SLAs. And that's really where I think another use case that process and task mining really play well together to help you manage and understand, are they following the golden process that you want them to follow, and are they skipping specific steps along the way that could be costing you money down the road with fines or regulatory needs. Yep.
Great. Now, before we move on to the next segment, if you found these tales of innovation valuable, please like and subscribe to help us grow our audience.
Blueprints of Innovation.
So, Brian, in this segment, we define the tools and methods that we might have referenced before. And of course, in our case, we've been talking about process and task mining. So why don't we start by defining task mining? Can you give a brief overview for somebody who is not technical?
Absolutely. So task mining is all about going deep into work that is happening on the desktop. So in our typical scenario, we'll actually have an agent that sits on the desktop, and it'll generate event logs from that desktop and tell you kind of how people are getting about their day and what applications they're using, how they're using those applications. And then we can take that information and put that in an organized fashion to show you a day in the life view of what an employee's day looks like and how they're getting work done.
Right. So like in the introduction, you mentioned 35 applications on average,
Yes.
from the data. This is that perspective, the perspective of, let's say, an employee, a representative in a contact center or something like that. What does their workday look like?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. It's typically contact center and back office. And it really gives the employee a voice, because a lot of times they don't, people don't really understand, again, kind of what their days look like. And I think for them to have a voice on the daily pain points, it goes a long way.
And the other example you gave, where the voice that you give them is also helping them actually say things that they, for one reason or another, couldn't get across previously.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah.
Now let's talk about process mining. How's that different?
So process mining is a discipline that kind of sits between data mining and process excellence. So it allows you to use data to really understand how processes are getting executed by your core systems. So you think of a core system, could be like a Pega, could be a Salesforce, could be other applications where they collect event logs. So each of these systems will keep traces of how work is getting done. And so we take those logs that are generated by those systems, and we actually will use that information to create a map of how the work is getting done. Like what steps is it following? Are there rework loops happening? Are there potential bottlenecks in that process? And we use that information to provide analytics back to show you kind of at the work level, kind of across the enterprise, what does that end-to-end process look like?
So it sounds like it's the perspective of the organization and what the outcomes that it's trying to achieve. Can it also be used to understand the customer experience?
Yes, exactly. So I was going to add into that is, a lot of times you're looking at the organizational level, like this particular piece of work, I got an invoice, and how's that invoice moving through the organization as it works. But you can also look at the customer journey. So what does the customer journey look like when they're like applying for a credit card, or when they're applying for a loan or a mortgage or whatever it may be? Just to understand, what does that customer journey look like, and are there things that you're doing to your customers as an organization that may be driving them to churn faster, maybe driving them to abandon things in the cart, whatever it may be. Thinking back to the not only operational excellence, but also the strategic view of it, and how can I create more value for my customers.
Okay, great. How do the two disciplines interact? Do you drill down from one to the other, or is that a different type of relationship?
Yeah, so they're very tightly connected. So if you think back to the healthcare example I mentioned before, so the process mining will give you the wide view of what's going on across the organization. And at certain points in that process, you're going to need to drill deep into like tasks, and especially when a person's involved. And so the two connect very closely when you have those swivel activities where maybe a piece of work is assigned to an employee and they're having to go on their desktop and do certain things. And then now you can see, okay, this is why this particular step took so long, because someone was having to go do 10 different things off of the core system to get it done.
Okay, so maybe a little bit like dimensions that are complementary, where if you are wondering why a certain part of the process behaves a certain way, you can sort of turn from the side and see, oh, okay, this is what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And so with process mining, what are the key elements of data and tooling that you need to actually use that?
Yeah, so there's actually 3 pieces of information that you need to get started with process mining. You need some sort of identifier for the piece of work, like a case ID. You need the name of the activity, which would represent the step that someone is following in that step. And you need a timestamp of when that activity happened. And with those 3 pieces of information, boom, you can start creating process maps, you can do analysis. Now, additional attributes about what is that piece of work, like maybe the region that it occurred in, the cost to do that piece of work. Any of those additional attributes will just make your analysis that much better. But with those 3 pieces of information, you can get off and running and start doing process mining.
So that's it's not a very high barrier. So it sounds like not only can you obviously do this with Pega, but if your business process touches other systems, maybe an enterprise resource planner or something like that, that would be something that you could get from almost any system.
Yes, absolutely. So any of those systems that are, systems of record for transactions and things like that, typically will have event logs that you can use for process mining. What we do find sometimes is some of the systems that have been built maybe by the company itself, or maybe that have been around for a very long time, may not have the same level of logging. And that's where task mining can come in and also help complement process mining and give you some more information and actually generate those event logs for you as well. So
Cool, great.
Innovator's Playbook.
So in this third and last segment, we aim to provide our audience with practical advice. So let's go back to the perspective of a business leader. What is the right time for them to start seeking the process and task mining capability?
That's a great question. I think anytime you want to go about and make change within the organization, I think that's the right time, right? So, I mean, I could be corny and say the right time is now, because I think everybody's always trying to make change. And if you're trying to understand kind of what your employees are going through, or you're looking to make your customers' lives better, I think those are always good things to do. A lot of times what we'll see our customers do is they'll look at process and task mining to, one, migrate off of legacy technology to some more standard kind of structured technology. They'll look to optimize processes that they already have within Pega, since that's where I'm at. They'll look for ways to introduce more automation. And then the last thing that I think I'm starting to see a lot more of is they're really trying to create this more operations center type view of processes and really understand where the work is and how can they maybe optimize how work is flowing in the organization. Whereas, like in a call center world, there's always somebody taking a look at where the calls are flowing and how that's going. And I think that's kind of the next phase and where things are going with process and task mining and really understanding where work is and how it's going. So I really think that, you could start down any of those paths at any moment. And, organization, there's never a shortage of things to do in an organization and ways to make things either more efficient or make, things better for your customers and your employees.
I think in one of your articles that we'll link in the description, you're making the point that process and task mining isn't a one and done activity. I think I quite like that expression. And that instead it's part of a continuous improvement, like a cycle.
Yes.
So how should a business leader visualize that cycle with process mining and process and data mining involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I look at process and task mining kind of being the beginning of that cycle, right? So you use process and task mining to understand and discover what's going on in your organization. And then you can very quickly know, okay, where do I need to put in orchestration for my processes? And then you can continue to do analysis there to understand where do I have opportunities to optimize, and then you kind of go back around. It's a circle, right? And those things really play well together. And I think process and task mining just kind of plug in along the way.
Yeah, that's kind of also when I mentioned that one of the previous guests was talking about how important it was to get data for them. I think that's one of the key opportunities for as far as I'm concerned here is that whether you're in design or process optimization or any other function, it is not everything to get data, but it is a prerequisite.
Yes.
Otherwise, those conversations are just too abstract or opinionated, which is fine, again, but it's best to have informed opinions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the promises. And I think the things that you see with process and task mining is you're using data to make decisions as opposed to going off of people's opinions or bias. And I'm going to tell you another quick story about an organization we work with where, they have task mining on thousands and thousands of desktops, and they're also using process mining. And what they're doing is they've actually created these little process improvement centers out throughout the company. And so they've actually enabled people closest to the business to be process miners so that they can start to use data to make decisions on where they're going to make improvements. And some of the improvements may not always be introduce automation or put in a workflow. Maybe I need to go train these tellers on how to do their work better, or maybe something else, right? I think the more you can get the information out and get the data out to people, the better. And I think the results are just kind of multiply on each other in that scenario.
Oh, that's great. That's very inspiring. So just staying on that topic, from a practical perspective, a business leader that wants his team to be able to leverage the data, what kind of resources do they have available? Where should they start?
Yeah, so we found the most success when you have a good partnership with the business and IT, because a lot of times the business folks aren't the ones actually doing the development work, right? And the IT folks may not have all the process expertise to go in and really understand what the process is telling you. So I think having those two resources really makes a huge difference in making sure it's successful. Also the data acquisition, we've talked about getting data. Obviously, that's a big part of the project as well, is making sure you have the data in the right format and you have the necessary pieces of information like we spoke about earlier. But I think if you can get those things, you're off to a good success. And the ones that we've seen that work the best, are typically co-run by business and IT together, just because they're able to kind of pair up on the process.
Yeah. And I think it's a general best practice in Pega and other technologies.
Yep.
It does seem to be a recurrent theme. And just on the side of training, from a business perspective, are there specific courses for business people to leverage those tools?
Yeah, so we obviously have a lot of training online. We have courses for both process and task mining that are readily available. There's process mining classes through Coursera and all the regular internet providers as well. So there's a lot of training. There's a lot of books out there as well. There's a great book called The Process Mining Manifesto that was written quite a while ago by Will van der Ost, who's the godfather of process mining. So there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of things you can go learn. Obviously, YouTube is a great resource that shows you a lot of different information as well. So
all right, and we'll link some of that, the book definitely in the description. And you've mentioned it already, but I was wondering, how does AI fit into all of this now that there is so much new AI capabilities, and at Pega especially? Does that change the game for process and task mining?
I think it does. So I think there's a couple different areas where we're honing in on AI, especially the generative AI capabilities. So process mining already has AI built into it. We're making decisions and using algorithms to determine root cause analysis, doing simulations and predictions about how a process may perform when you make changes. So that's been around for quite a while. That's kind of the typical AI stuff. But with generative AI coming in, we now have the ability for you to have a conversation with your process. You can ask business questions to process mining without having to go directly into the dashboards and ask things like, tell me where my bottlenecks are with this process. And then you get an answer in plain text. And that really helps lower the barrier of entry for process mining. We were talking about training a minute ago. You may not need as much training because anybody could become a process miner because you just have to ask a question. I'm sure you've probably seen our blueprint announcement that was launched earlier this year, and that's been a huge success. Now think about if you can link process mining to help inform creating blueprints and help speed up that legacy transformation. That's another area where I think generative AI and process mining are going to play well together, where you can take that information and use that to help accelerate the development of the structured applications as well. Yeah, and I think the last area is just how do we help make data acquisition easier? There's a lot of opportunity there as well, because that, as I mentioned earlier, that's a big part of the process as well.
Can serve as an accelerator, I guess, to go and acquire the data from legacy systems.
Exactly.
And as we're about to conclude, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
One of the things that, and I want to go back to something we talked about a little bit ago, is a lot of times I get asked, what is the difference between process and task mining, and when do I use one versus the other? And if I use task mining, I don't use process mining. And I want to, again, I think as you mentioned in the article that I wrote a while ago, I think couldn't be further from the truth. They're not, mutually exclusive. I think they're complements of each other. And if you really want to do continuous optimization and improvement right, then you need to have both, right? Because there's going to be times, it's like if you're going to go build a house, you're not always going to have a hammer. You don't always want to use the hammer. Sometimes you need a screwdriver. Sometimes you need a drill. Well, there are different tools that you can use for different scenarios, because you may want to, first try to figure out, okay, what does my work look like across the organization? And then where do I have opportunities to maybe streamline those particular processes? But then you may have opportunities where you're like, hey, I have these spin-off moments where people are having to get out of my core applications, my structured applications, and do work on the desktop. And I think both of those drive value, and the only way you're really going to be able to see what's going on across your enterprise and deep into the enterprise is if you have both process and task mining. And I think that'd be the one last thought I'd just leave everybody with, because I think that's critical to this whole thing, is really going wide and deep with the two.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. This has been fun.
I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into process and task mining with Brian. His expertise shines a light on how organizations can move beyond gut feel and traditional reporting to embrace a future with precise and actionable insights. Brian's stories of success illustrate how a combination of technology and strategic vision can lead to transformative business results. As you reflect on today's episode, consider how these insights could apply to your organization. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, or rate and review the show on your favorite podcasting app. We look forward to your feedback. In the meantime, we have more topics and guests lined up, so stay tuned for more tales of innovation that inspire, challenge, and transform. Until next time, peace.
Thanks for tuning in to Innovation Tales. Get inspired, connect with other practitioners, and approach the digital revolution with confidence. Visit innovation-tales.com for more episodes. See you next time.